There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. I have a very special guest today, and that is the novelist Ellen Hawley, joining us today from Cornwall, but a writer who was a New York City native and lived for a long time in Minnesota. And I read and was completely taken with her novel that came out in the UK earlier this year, Other People Manage. And I really am dying to talk to Ellen Hawley about this novel. Ellen, welcome.
Glad to be here.
So this novel opens with the first-person narrator, Marge, cleaning out her life partner Peg's closet after Peg has died of cancer. And it is a really, well, I'm not sure I would use the word poignant, but I can't think of a better word, but it's a really powerful opening to the novel because Marge is one of the more fascinating characters, certainly narrators, that I have encountered in recent times, and she is decidedly unsentimental and unromantic, which I think makes that opening scene more powerful. And then we start to go back into the past history of their relationship. Tell us about Marge.
Marge is a bus driver. She started in the 70s, one of the first women who drove bus in Minneapolis, city bus in Minneapolis. She is a woman who comes from a difficult family, and in Peg's family, she finds really a home and softens and opens up. And this becomes, this is everything she attaches to. So that when Peg dies, she is really left saying, what's left to me? What am I going to do with my life? And she's unsure at that point, even whether she still has Peg's family. And that's part of what the book is about.
Absolutely. Approximately how old is Marge at the opening of the novel? How old was Peg when she died? She seemed younger than, she wasn't 70, was she? She was more like in her 50s?
She dies quite young. You mustn't trust me around numbers. People get hurt when I get close to numbers. Terrible things happen. And so I will probably get their ages wrong, frankly. I would say they were in their early 30s when they met, and when Peg dies, they're probably around 50. But again, you don't want to trust me with numbers.
Well, and I think that it's kind of left open so that the reader is projecting their own sort of sense of stages of life onto their interpretation of it.
Point when in the editing process, the editor at Swift Press, who's wonderful, he's really fabulous, got back to me and said, no, these ages aren't adding up. So
well, that means that the ages aren't all that important, say. Two things I'd like to get in here near the beginning. One is about spoilers. Ellen and I have talked offline, and we both agree that there's a certain major thrust of the story that we're going to put behind a spoiler wall. We're going to talk about it later in this chat, and you will get lots of warning that we're moving into that territory, you viewers, and you can decide whether you want to keep watching or not. So up until that point, this will be a spoiler-free chat. The other thing is that it is a crying shame that this book is a little bit difficult to get for people who don't live in the UK. You can buy it at online booksellers whose names shall remain unmentioned, but Ellen has told me that you can also get it from the UK bookseller, Waterstones, and probably Blackwell's and other places. It has not yet been published in North America. The story is set in Minnesota, and this is your first novel to be published in the UK. All of your other work, which we'll talk about later, was published in the US, and I hope that this finds a publisher in North America soon.
So do I, very much.
So then we go back to in the 1970s in Minneapolis, and Marge and Peg meets. So the thing that I want to get in early in this chat too is that Marge is just this most incredible narrator. She's, in a sense, emotionally stunted, at least at the beginning of the story, and really grows and develops through her relationship with Peg. But and she has these just incredible observations about people and the energy between people. And there are so many gorgeous small moments, gorgeously written small moments about her watching people and panicking. I don't know what to do or say, but the way that she describes these, whether it's an argument with Peg or stuff going on with Peg's family or many of the other things that go on here, she's just such a keen observer.
I think in some ways that's probably linked to her distance. I don't think of her as emotionally stunted, but she's very definitely distant from people. And
Maybe
it
the
leaves people to observe.
maybe the way I should have put that is that she doesn't trust herself. She knows what to do or say, but she usually ends up, whatever it is, and there might be some debatable moments we'll get into later, but that she does do usually what the situation calls for. And it's just really, and I keep coming back to the fact that there's nothing sentimental about this. There's nothing romantic about it in that larger sense, which just makes her such a incredible narrator for this story. Tell us about Peg.
Peg is much more, she's a much softer character. She's much more able to engage with people. When they first meet, she's studying to be a therapist, which is for Peg for Marge, I'm sorry, somewhat intimidating. And she's the person that Marge relies on to know what to do in any given situation with other people.
The description of how they first, and they don't fall into bed. It's not that fall. That is not the right verb to use. But the description of how very relatable, but how nervous people kind of, how do you get into bed with each other? And it's just, it's not. I'm kind of chortling, but it's actually quite beautiful. And so their relationship begins.
One of the things I really wanted from this book was to write about a relationship, to write about love without writing about romance, without softening any of the difficulties. Yes. And so this is not the perfect relationship, and they're not the perfect couple. And they're as awkward as people are. I think our culture really builds up a lot of bullshit about relationships. And lesbian literature does very much, not all of it, but a lot of it, because it has been, we've had such a hard time being open at all and finding each other at all, that we want to think, yes, once I come out, it will be, or once I find the right person, everything will be solved.
Happily ever after.
Everything isn't solved. Relationships are difficult, whether they're straight or gay. And that was what I was reaching for with this.
It's a relationship that's moving from the other people manage. So we've got manage in the title. It's a relationship that is shaped and deepened and carried on from one day to the next through a series of crisis managements.
True. Of course, being fiction, you pick up at the crisis moments, because that's when the story gets interesting.
Well, and I think I questioned it early on. I think, oh boy, it's just one thing after another with these two. And then I started thinking about my own life in my 30s or whatever, and this is pretty accurate. At least it resonates for me. So we're going to talk in a non-spoilery way now about the fact that when Peg and Marge meet, there is another woman kind of hovering around, Megan. And this is really important for the entire story, but certainly at the opening. We're going to talk about it just in a little bit of detail now, and then get into some more stuff later. So what would you like to say about Megan to start us off?
Megan is one of those people that imagines that an interaction with someone is much more than it ever was for the other person. She's convinced she has a relationship with Peg, and she can't let it go. And for Peg, there never was a relationship. But Megan continues to stalk her and to show up doing initially very small things that in and of themselves don't seem like much, except that they destroy Peg's peace of mind. And when she gets together with Marge, Peg and Marge's peace of mind.
So it very quickly escalates into, fatal attraction type behavior. And I don't remember ever reading anything about stalking in literary fiction, certainly that was this compelling. That a crisis that they have in the early days of their relationship, which is all consuming, and you can't help but feel that you are right there with them moment by moment as they're living through, as they're trying to form, as Marge and Peg are trying to form their own relationship, the unbearable layers of stress that this stalking stuff puts on them. And then that situation ends very dramatically. And we're not going to say any more about that until we get to the spoiler part of this discussion. I'm not somebody who underlines things in books typically. And so when I was flipping through and just sinking back into the story last night, I noticed that I did underline one sentence, and that is, and this is Marge speaking of her relationship with Peg. We'd always been closest when the world was crashing down around us. So what's the next crash after the Megan thing kind of moves off stage?
After Megan moves off stage, what they find is that they're what should be what they've been looking forward to is this perfect moment that when they really can form their relationship is very difficult, and they're not doing well with each other, and they're very awkward together, very angry, very lost, really. Yeah. And are not brought together until Peg's younger sister has a child, much too young. With a, and Peg and the sister's mother is furious. And that family crisis draws Marge and Peg back together again.
It really does. And again, it's the way that story, the way their relationship develops and the way this novel develops, it's like they, as you just said, their intimacy forms on the basis of how they together cope, and not just cope, but support Peg's family through this. And then for a big chunk of the novel, if not most of the rest of the novel, we are with them and or with Marge after Peg has died, dealing with all the ramifications of this within Peg's family. And there's something that in a way feels quite radical with how that story develops, because we're not ever really focused on the, I mean, we are, but it's always in the way that they are connected with Peg's family and its crises.
Yeah, I think they are people who, in a sense, they connect best when they're needed, and when the world pulls them, when they're pulled outward, they pull together into each other much better. Again, when Peg is ill, they're pulled together very closely, and they really form a very, very tight relationship. Again, under pressure.
Maybe this is a good place to talk about the title. It's a very curious title. Other People Manage. What would you like to say about the title?
It wasn't the original title. The publisher suggested it, and it does work, I think. It's something that that one of them says that Peg is working as a therapist, having trained when they first met. She's working as a therapist and finding it a huge weight as time goes on, as therapists do. My partner was a family therapist for decades, and so I'm very conscious of the weight that people carry, and their clients come to them with expectations that they can't possibly meet. And, the technology, the tools they have are not up to the job that they're handed. And most therapists do best when they work with what they call the worried well, who need just a little bit of support and could pull themselves together, and they go dancing off and everyone is happy. When you get the really hard cases, there's so little that you can work with. And I think many of the best therapists, or many of the most ethical therapists, feel a real weight of people's expectations and the limits of what they can do. And Peg is feeling that. And honestly, I can't remember which one of them says at some point, other people manage. Why can't you? Why can't I?
Right. And I believe that conversation opens with Peg saying to Marge, maybe I'm going to become a bus driver with
Yeah.
be much less stressful. Now, this just occurred to me as I was listening to you. Do you think that it's possible that the incredible trauma of what they went through with the stalking incident with a very disturbed person, that kind of added another layer of stress to the way that she was trying to help really lost people in her profession?
It's possible. I never wrote or tried to imagine the book from inside Peg's consciousness, so I don't really know. It's written from Marge's point of view, and I'm trapped there. I can't step outside to know whether.
Well, I love that answer. So it's fantastic. Great. I would like to share two small passages, and I didn't talk about this with you in advance. I thought I would just read them, but if you would prefer, would you like to read them?
Oh, I'd love to. Tell me what.
When I was flipping through it and falling so deeply back into it, these two struck me as just a really representative example of the prose of your writing and of the relationship.
Okay. This first segment starts when Marge and Peg are about to see Peg's sister at the hospital. She's just given birth. The sister is named Dina. I nodded. One part of me didn't want to let go of being the injured party, and the rest wouldn't admit that I'd been mad to start with, so I didn't trust my voice to sound gracious about this. If some genie had offered me happiness right then, I think I'd have turned it down for the brooding pleasure of holding on to my grievance. Truce, she said. Peace.
And then the plot ensues, and
then we pick up when they're in the hospital room. Peg came back and leaned beside me on the windowsill. She caught me watching her and smiled. Not the kind of smile you decide on, but the kind that comes on its own. With no warning, we were in love again. We were perfect. The family was quiet for a while, and I let myself believe that since Peg and I were happy, they must be too. Then Dina started talking again, unable to hear silence without pouring herself into it.
Just really powerful. You're an amazing writer. Why haven't I heard of you before?
I am widely unknown.
Well, I hope to do it within my limited powers to change that. So,
Thank you.
Viewers, Ellen and I are now going to get into the meat of the one of the central parts of this novel that we consider to be kind of spoiler, even though most of it happens really close to the beginning of the novel. So if you don't want to know anything about that, actually what I'll do is I'll put a timestamp in the video so that you can skip over this to go directly to where we talk about other topics later in the chat. So you have been warned, viewers, and here we go. So should you start or should I?
Why don't you do it? I'm
Okay.
always interested
So
to hear how someone else sees the book.
great. This stalking incident with Megan at the very beginning of Peg and Marge's relationship, it takes quite a turn. I mean, it's an all-encompassing, they are unable to really think or do anything or build anything else. It's just it's relentless. It's just hijacked their lives. And Megan's, the things that she's doing to kind of the stalking thing she's doing, leaving things, lighting fires outside Peg's apartment and stuff, it's getting worse. And it's disturbing them more. And they're even talking about going into a witness protection program just to be safe. And what would that do to Peg's really tight-knit relationship with her family?
Let me interrupt just a second to say that witness protection is their sort of code word for just disappearing.
Disappearing. It's not witness. Thank you. Yes. And so after one particularly disturbing incident that really upsets Peg and Marge, but really, really gets to Peg, Marge takes it upon herself to intervene. And she basically beats the crap out of Megan. She goes to where she lives and she knocks her around for a while. And that ends the problem in a sense, but sadly, tragically, shockingly, Megan kills herself the same day or the next day. And so then this new couple, Peg and Marge, are left to process all that. Wow.
Yeah, and they come out of it shell-shocked, really.
Absolutely. And so does many a reader, I think.
And
So
Marge, more than Peg, carries a huge sense of guilt. And at the same time, doesn't know what else she could have done.
that's right.
But she goes through the rest of her life, really carrying the weight of that decision that she made.
And it's a shock. It was a shock to me. I empathized, however complicatedly, with what Marge did. And then all this other, then we move into all the stuff going on with, fairly quickly, all the other stuff going on with Peg's family. And so then, and I thought this was a magical part of the way that you told the story, is that I kind of, by the end, I had just put it, because it was a disturbing part of the story, and then there was all this other stuff going on with Peg's family. So then at the kind of the end, not the end of her life, but closer to the end of the story, or maybe really around the time of Peg's death, all this stuff starts coming back on the page and in Marge's consciousness about it. And then I'm thinking, oh yeah, that happened too. That was, oh my God. And she's been carrying this all through all this other stuff. And I just thought, wow, I don't have any words, but it was just a really profound reading experience for me, the way that was woven together.
I think there's a lot of talk among people about how you deal with trauma and resolving trauma. And I think a lot of us carry the illusion that you can just put it to rest and walk away in some way. And my feeling is that you carry these things. They change, you can carry them. They may weigh less, they may weigh more. You can carry them differently, but they don't disappear. And I think Marge comes to terms with her feelings and with what's happened, but not by putting it aside, and not in any way that says it's over. It's not over. This is a debt she feels she owes and can't pay ever. But I do think she'll carry it more lightly after the book ends, and as she goes on into the rest of her life. I think she'll carry it more lightly.
As you envisioned the story, or as you were writing it, or now that it's out in the world, did you anticipate an ethical, creating an ethical challenge for your readers about this incident?
No, I mean, I don't work that way. I can't. I started out, all I knew was that I had this character who was lying on the couch watching the light change on the wall and absolutely flattened. And writing it was a process of discovering what happened. Why was she there? And then once the partner's death came into it, what was their relationship? And I move forward with it without knowing where I'm going to go. I mean, occasionally I have written books where I do know where I'm going, but with this one I didn't. And after Megan's death, it was about, I think, 90 pages in, and thought, oh my God, now what do I do? I just ended the book. And as I picked them back up, I realized the energy had changed dramatically, and they were in some ways a very different couple.
Absolutely. Have you had ethically judgmental or conflicted responses about that part of the story from readers?
I haven't. I
Okay.
may yet, but I haven't.
And I, yeah, for me, it wasn't, that's not my reaction, but other than just kind of in a, just a awestruck way, that there were so many issues. So there was a knot of issues there, and I just loved the way it. There was something really bold about going there in the story, and I really appreciated that. But it was a big shock to my system, and it ties back to this incredibly layered characterization of Marge, because she is always, or so often, second guessing herself about, I don't know what to do, what should I do right now, I don't know what to do right now. Meanwhile, she's taking in all this stuff and feeding it to us, the reader. Feeding is not the right word, but anyway, portraying it, depicting it in a way that's just, you just get pulled so deep into the intrapersonal and the interpersonal stuff. And then there was this one time in her life where she took a really, where she kind of grabbed the situation by the, oh boy, that's going to be a mixed metaphor. She intervened, and it was violent, and it had ramifications for the rest of her life. It triggered the end of the stalker's life. And it's just, there's something really, well, I'm losing my words here, but there's something that I've been wondering about, and I don't even have the ability to put it into a question, about somebody who's such a second guesser. And then this one big thing that, I mean, she does lots of other things. I mean, the way that she responds to Peg, and the life they create together, and her love for Peg's family. But this one thing was so overwhelmingly action oriented, and with all the consequences, and it just made for such an incredible experience for me as a reader. So as maybe I relate a little to Marge in terms of always wondering, oh no, I don't know what to do, and I'm panicking, what should I do? And you know, it is, in a way. Do you think it's an open question whether what she did was right or wrong?
I think it's, oh boy, is that yes, it's an open question. I think it was both right and wrong. I don't, I think if she hadn't intervened, the situation would probably not have changed and might have escalated.
It might have escalated. I mean, it really felt like their lives were in danger if things kept going.
Or at
Certainly
least their lives would have been dogged. They would never have been able to live fully and freely. They would have been dogged forever by this woman.
Right.
That, whether it's right or wrong, I think it's right and wrong. I think it's everything has a cost. The cost of that was high. And it's not, I can't do a yes or no on that.
That's why you're a novelist.
And in the end, when Peg is looking back and thinking, would I have done it again? She can't answer it either.
That's right. That's right.
And that feels right to me.
Yeah, it felt right to me as the reader as well. What a fascinating novel. I would like you to tell us about your other writings.
Okay. Past or future?
Let's start with the past. I think you've had at least 3, or is it more than 3 books before this?
I've got 3 books out. The first one was called Trip Sheets, which started honestly as a series of short stories about a single character and was published as a novel. It be up to the reader to say if it works as a novel. People seem to accept it as a novel. It's about a woman who starts out as a cab driver and then becomes a social worker, and it follows her evolution both as a young woman. It's also a coming out story. She starts out in the first story sleeping with a man and looking at him and thinking, that's it, I'm done. And through a whole series of women she goes out with, sleeps with, all the wrong people, as most people do, until she gets into a long-term relationship. And again, it's an anti-romance. It's not about finding the perfect relationship. It's about struggling. It's about doing the best you can. It's about finding something that works for you. I had a reader get in touch with me in the last couple of years. She'd found it and was really moved by the fact that it wasn't, this person didn't find the ideal relationship. She found a dozen wrong relationships, and she needed to. That was part of her path. And I'm touched that it meant something to this woman, because again, lesbian literature tends to romanticize a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it. And I find that really boring.
I just ask, when did that novel come out?
Oh Lord, that was a long time ago.
I can look it up if that would help.
25 years ago.
1998?
That sounds right. The second novel was a political satire about a radio talk show host who gets bored one night. I used to do talk radio. And it gets very crazy. Anyway, it's a long, slow, boring night, and she starts riffing on the idea that the Vietnam War never happened. It was all just a complete put-up job, covering up she has no idea what, but it's a great, grand conspiracy theory. And she doesn't believe it for a minute. But the next thing that happens is that an organization, a right-wing nut organization that believes in every conspiracy theory going, pops up and starts feeding her information. And she looks at it, and she's never entirely convinced that they're right, but she's never entirely convinced that they're not. Anyway, it makes her career, which is what she's wanted. And it changes the politics of the US, and it just, it takes off. Unfortunately, it came out during the hope and change era of the first Obama run for the presidency, which was absolutely the wrong time for it. And it didn't do terribly well, and it's now invisible. I would love to find a publisher who wants to reissue it, because it's more relevant than ever. It's completely batty.
That sounds...
The third one, again, is very different. It's called The Divorce Diet. And I wrote it for a friend whose marriage was going down in flames, and lost weight. And one or the other of us said, yeah, The Divorce Diet. And I said, the other one, whoever, we both think we came up with the title, said, great title. And I wrote the first chapter to see if I could make her laugh, because at that point she badly needed to laugh. She laughed, I kept writing, and it turned into a novel. It's about a woman who's with a young child, baby, and her marriage is going down in flames, and she has this invisible diet guru who she has long conversations with.
There's a variety of tones of your books.
Yes.
It sounds like maybe the first, your debut, Trip Sheets, is more, shall we say, serious, or like Other People Manage, but the middle two are one satire and one, what maybe I misunderstood, but is The Divorce Diet kind of, is it a comic novel?
Yeah, very much.
So you work in a variety of idioms or tones.
I think Other People Manage is also funny. I mean, in spite of being very serious. I read at a North Cornwall Book Festival and managed to get the audience laughing, which was what I was hoping for. And there is an element of absurdity to it, not in just in viewpoint, not an event.
No, not. And now you make me want to reread it. I was going to be rereading it anyway, and what's coming next? And when? I'm feeling very impatient already.
There is Swift Press has accepted a second novel, which should be out next year, although we don't have a publication date yet. It's called A Decent World. It is
Jeez.
about a woman a young woman in Minneapolis who was raised by her grandmother after her mother abandoned her. And her grandmother was a communist. And the grandmother dies at the beginning of the book, and the narrator it's really a reckoning with the history, the legacy of the left in America, or in the US, sorry. Especially to a Canadian, I shouldn't say America as if that.
Oh, no, that's
All of it. It really is her going through what are the positive things that her grandparents handed down to her that they got from being communists, and what were the failures, and her own experience of the left, and her own lack of answers to any of the questions that seem important. What, as Lenin said, what is to be done? And the answer is, I don't know. Again, it's in addition to it being about the legacy of the American communists, it's also about family. And this woman is very, very deeply attached to her grandmother and really bereft without her.
It has been an amazing experience talking to you after thinking so deeply into your book. Like I've alluded to a couple times, I leafed through it last night. I finished reading it about 3 or 4 months ago, and I wanted to do a full review on my channel, and I couldn't find the words. I started writing out a script, which I never do, but I couldn't, you know what? And then I thought to myself, you know what? No, I'm not going to try to do a review. I just want to talk to the author. And I'm so glad that you agreed to come on, and that I hope that this chat will spread the news farther and wider about this novel. And I'm looking forward to seeing what else you do and what you've done in the past. Thanks for being so generous with your time, Ellen.
Well, thank you. And it's been a fascinating conversation. So I'm grateful.